Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to the ClarITea Chat over a cup of tea with Vijay Ramachandran. Hi, Vijay. Welcome to the show.
Cheers, Jagdish.
Cheers. So, I don't have to introduce Vijay, but for those of you who don't know him, rare breed, I must say. Vijay is an awarded journalist, researcher, and business storyteller. Um, he was the editor of CIO magazine, and which he came out of and started his own consulting into storytelling for business change. So he has researched for 25 years how organizations absorb technology and change through an annual digital transformation audit. I actually quoted his research when I mentioned that 83% of technology programs fail to deliver ROI, and we will cover more of that in our chat. And those are some really interesting stories of successes and failures. Um, Vijay and I have always had long discussions over a cup of tea on why it is so rare to have success with technology. And today is one of these days when we are sharing just another of our discussions with all of you, our audience. So, welcome Vijay to this edition of ClarITea Chat. Before we go further, here is the quick recap of the purpose of ClarITea Chat, which I introduced to everyone. So let me share my screen. Okay, so the ClarITea Chat is a discussion over a cup of tea on everything IT. Um, the purpose of the chat is to uh, to really bring out the root causes as well as the, the palliatives of why 83% of IT programs fail to deliver intended ROI. So there are a few of them, which I kind of just want to segue our discussion into with. The first is the complexity of IT. So um, most of the functions generally are a function, let's say, for example, HR or finance for manufacturing or banking industry. But in case of IT has to address all the functions horizontally across the organization. So that's an added complexity that you just don't need to know industry and technology. You also need to know the processes. And the second thing is that there's no other function whose impact on people is as immense and as profound as technology. And so that's the first dimension of of reasons of why so many programs fail. The second is that IT is a nascent management function. If you see um, all the other functions like finance, manufacturing, HR, they are hundreds of year old functions. IT came out, as in Vijay's words, IT came out of the closet just about 20, 25 years back. And if you see digital, that's just about 10 years old. So there is not so much of formal knowledge base or the training programs or degree programs which are there on IT or digital, and that basically leads to our purpose, which is why 83% of IT programs fail to deliver ROI. The next one is the asymmetry of talent. So almost 95 plus percent of technology talent is on the supply side, which is with technology providers or the system integrators, and that leaves a very small talent base in the organizations. Now, when you combine that with the next one, which is technology's high incremental margins. If you look at technology product companies, the incremental cost of sale is near zero. And even the system integrators have pretty high margins. What that leads to is pretty intense sales and marketing efforts coming from, you know, uh, a set of experts which far outnumber the ones that you're selling to. And so these are a few reasons. These are a few factors which I can say uh, point towards, an intense marketing efforts on IT, but very little success, 17%. And Vijay is going to tell some stories about how that 17% comes about. So here is the clarity chat for all of you. This is learning from the 17% club. So these are informal chats on real questions in IT management and careers. This is answered by CIOs as well as leaders over a cup of tea. Primarily that because the science is not so well developed, it's an art. And art is learned from an artist. So you can never learn a tabla from reading books or by watching a YouTube video. And these are candid discussions on IT management themes. And um, that's the clarity chat for you. Okay, now how do I come back? Okay, I'm back. So, Vijay, welcome again to this experience sharing. I call it decoding the art of finding ROI with technologies. As you see this dismal rate of IT success, we first want to understand you as a person, as a human being. So please share, your life story with us. Maybe a few inflection points which have revealed to you, how do you find success with technology?
Right. Just a few days back, I spent time with first year and second year students of my college. And my college had essentially asked me to go over a lot of that ground. Uh, why is it that I chose to be a journalist? Why do I now call myself a storyteller? Why has my career moved in that direction? And are there any ways in which why were stories so important to me? We won't go over all of that because that's a fairly long life even now. But I want to, I'm really glad that you asked me about this because I've been thinking about two or three things which have remained with me over time at various points in time. So I'm going to take you a little back in time to 1975. For a lot of Indians our age, that represents the year, the summer that emergency gets declared. And a few weeks before that happened, we lived in Delhi at that time. My dad was in the railways. My mother was in the Cement Research Institute. And it was one of those days when we had hours and hours of power cuts, right? Uh, it used to be called load shedding back then, right? So it was the night time. There was a power cut. We were sitting around. We had somehow had dinner in a kind of candlelight and lamplight. And then my dad did something very interesting. He was an S&T engineer in the railways. Signals and telecom was his area. So he picked up one of these lemons. Up north, it's known as a galgal nimbu. Typically, you make pickle with it. It's gigantic. So he took this, rubbed it in his hands until it was nice and juicy in the middle. Took one of my mother's hairpins, because those used to be made out of iron or steel, stuck in a copper wire on the other side and connected it to a flashlight, a torchlight bulb, and it lit. Uh, Not extremely strongly, but it was amazing to see electricity being generated from just a lemon, right? Uh, there was magic in that moment, and it's one of the most precious memories that I have, right, from when I was little. And the thing was that what my father ignited was a path that night that led my brother into things like making burglar alarms, battery eliminators, radios, all kinds of electronics, right? The smell of solder, of molten solder, was a big part of my life. But I'll tell you what was more important for me. uh, I think it wasn't ultimately the knowledge of electronics that was the source of all that magic and wonder. It was knowing what you could do with it, right? If you put a capacitance, if you put a resistor, if you put a transistor, what do you really get out of it, right? So that was very important. Similarly, the direct parallel is technology per se is not the magic. It's what you do with it for an organization or an individual that the magic lies in. This conversation that we're having, not being in the same city or sharing it with so many other people, that's the real magic, right? So that's one bit. The second happened when I got my first regular job. So I started my career in journalism by freelancing for a while, covering defense, insurgency, terrorism, and stuff like that. And then I wound up in the Indian Express in Delhi. Uh, and one of the things that I used to look after outside of the business pages used to be something that Indian Express put out every week called the development page. It used to be opposite the edit page. It was where a lot of stories on social justice, environment, and those kind of things used to happen. And I remember our development editor was this veteran journalist, Usha Rai, and I remember her, being very focused on one, that everything needed to have a news peg because we were a newspaper. So it couldn't be something light. It had to be hard hitting news that we were covering in that page. The second thing, and I remember particularly there was on World AIDS Day, we were covering, and those were early days, early 90s, right? We were writing these stories, and it was, I had written something that was extremely dull. It was full of facts. It talked about cases and things like that. And then she put something, she said something very interesting. She said, why this article is reading in such a dull manner? Because there aren't any people at the center of it, right? So what she basically told me was, don't talk about the statistics, talk about the people who are affected by it, right? And then I went and spoke to some people who had contracted HIV and wove their stories in, and instantly the story lit up, right? It became relatable. So that was the second thing, that whatever you do in human endeavor, whether it is business, whether it is anything, you need to put people at the center of everything, right? That automatically not only increases interest, I think it hones very clearly what your target is. Whatever you do, at the end of it, someone must benefit from it, right? Not something, but someone, right? The third thing was a conversation that I had, uh, well, eh, well over 20 years back, right? In fact, maybe 22 years back, with a gentleman who, again, for people of our vintage, would know him very well, a person called Pradeep Kar, who's the CEO of Microland, right? Back then, Pradeep was ahead of the curve in a lot of things, right? So I had come down to Bangalore, in fact, to join a IT portal that he had set up. I was the deputy editor there. This was called IT Space. And I was talking to him, and we were trying to just having a conversation at his house over a party one day, early in the genesis of IT Space. And we were talking about what we needed to do to get that portal really going. This was part of the first .com boom in the country in '99. And he said something very interesting. We were trying to figure out what functionality should we put on the website, what might make it interesting for people to use, and things like that. And we got talking about recruiting, hiring, all of that. And he said there are only three things that you need to know. The challenge that we were having was we were having to discover everything anew. The internet was very new in this country at that time, right? He said you needed only three things to be successful at anything, um, whether it was life, whether it was work. He said the ability to work hard. Okay. The second was the ability to get along with people. And the third, and most importantly in his mind, was the ability to communicate your ideas clearly, right? So between these three things that I learned, and in life you come across a lot of learning, and you come across mentors, and you come across teachers, and you come across teams which teach you a lot. But I thought, for the purpose of this discussion, these are three things that I think become very critical. A, the fact that you must figure what you really want out of technology, not the technology per se. B, that to really get change done, you need to put people front and center. And three, you need to be able to, apart from working really hard and slogging, be able to get along with people and communicate your ideas clearly, right? And I think those are all things that come into play when CIOs are managing strategic technology or IT strategy in an organization. Yeah.
No, I think that's very very relevant, and I'm kind of going back to some of my past conversations with you. Uh, this putting people in the center and being able to communicate clearly and being able to touch people with your work. I think those are really really important. I'm sure you're going to touch upon that. I've got a question coming to you, but I think let's come back to you've been researching IT for maybe what 25 30 years now. And I was I in my first ClarITea chat, I said IT is a 50-year-old function. And when I told this to you, you said, no, Jagdish, this is 30-year-old function, because it was like, way back somewhere in the closet and it came out. So with a 30-year-old function, if you compare it to all the other functions, it's pretty new that way. It's nascent. The ecosystem is also small. I think we were doing some number crunching, you can do that number crunching again, about 5,000 IT leaders around. Now your research shows 17% success with technology, um, and you will tell us how the needle has moved over 25 years. But
Yeah.
I find it odd that the technology media is full of success stories. So tell us, I mean, this is an outsider's view. You have been interacting with CIOs for all these years. You've been studying the success with technology. So tell us, how do you look at the CIO community? Where do we need to improve? And where is this disconnect between, the success stories and celebrations that we hear versus what your research shows?
So there's one reason why that thing becomes successful. Why there may not be that dichotomy that seemingly exists, right? Let me just take you back in time. Uh, Now, so I started writing about technology around 93, 94. Yeah. It was largely the business of technology, trying to figure out who's setting up shop here, what's changing. India had, for instance, a thriving hardware market. We were net hardware exporters back then, right? Uh, and that's completely changed. Uh, Software was a very small thing. BPOs, KPOs were just starting out at that point. But one of the things that happened in the mid 90s was that a whole bunch of organizations, typically marquee brands, large brands, these organizations went and put in place ERP for the first time, right? So I was very curious because I'd been hearing about this. So I spent time with about across the next year and a half with 30 of these organizations, talking to various people. There, it wasn't research for a story. It was research purely for my own understanding of what's been changing. How does this change Indian organizations, right? So I studied these ERPs, rollouts across these, and at that time, when I started to probe a little deeper, and I said, okay, these were the business goals that you had set out for. How much have you achieved in the last year and a half? At that time, the number I got was, success percentages were even lower. Yeah. At that time, I was seeing only 14% were actually hitting the goals that they had set out to do. Uh, and if today I see, when I ask the question, like if you're transforming digitally, how many of you have really managed to, how many organizations have really seen a business value or benefit coming out of that absorption of digital technology? That number it's been fairly steady around 17% of success in the last maybe 3 years. It hasn't budged too much. There's a reason for that. Now, 17% success doesn't mean that IT projects have failed, right? They've been successful technologically, functionally, feature wise. I think all of those projects were a success, those initiatives were a success. I think where they failed was in delivering the true value to business that could have happened. So these are organizations that have absorbed the technology. There has been an investment, but that investment hasn't seen the kind of return they were expecting. And there are reasons. It's some part of it has to do with the way the IT department has emerged. Some part of it has to do with the way that the other departments look at the IT department, right? Uh, One of those things that I think we should really focus on also is what changed in 2008, 2009, right? For me, that's the watershed year after which nothing was the same for CIOs and their teams. This was when Lehman tumbled, the US went down. India didn't, the Indian economy actually was a fairly resilient one at that time, but it was what was known in those days as the slowdown. You're no longer growing at 8% or 9% or 10%. It had dropped to maybe 4 or 5%. But that itself, sent panic. Uh, and one of the things that happened very interestingly was that every successive year since then, Indian organizations have rolled out more and more projects with fewer and fewer people in shorter and shorter timelines, right? And this has been a cascade since then, since 2009. Once you went past that, in fact, instantly over the next 2 years, we saw, at least from where I could see, we could see almost a 4.5% increase in the number of projects. Okay, and I still remember at that time a lot of people used to question, where is the budget? IT budgets have got hit. Yeah, but then the second change shift happened, that the funding was not actually coming, new project funding was not always coming out of the IT budget. It was coming out of the SBU or department's budget. That was that was a second significant shift that happened, which also meant that if a particular department is sponsoring an IT initiative and it's coming out of their budget, now they had a greater say in what they wanted that project to do or how it was actually being built, right? Which was not there earlier. So for me, that there was an absolute shift. And what happened then? The third thing that changed after 2008, 2009 was that I saw organizations begin to question what the CIO was doing. And I think in their own wisdom, a lot of organizations suggested that the CIO ought to be doing something other than just IT. So that's the time when you started to see this really emerged in manufacturing more than anywhere else to start with, and then it moved across verticals. You started to see CIOs getting some P&L responsibility, some admin responsibility, some HR responsibility, something other than just IT. So at that time, that was interesting to me. Basically, they were saying you're a senior person, senior management person, you're part of the C-suite, and IT isn't enough. You need to be doing something more. And I think functionally, I think that shift in mindset happened around that time. Yeah. So all these three things have therefore influenced how organizations look at IT, right? Uh, so organizations are no longer investing in IT. They were funding business results. And I think that's where the 17% number comes in, because functionally you can deliver a project, but it's quite possible that it's still not delivering the business results. Yeah.
I'm just noting down that golden word, that organizations are not investing in IT; they're funding business results. That's, I think, a powerful one, and I think that's where the research also is. And I'm careful in, when I talk about the ClarITea Chat and the purpose and all, I'm very careful in not saying that 83% of the projects fail. It's 83% of the projects don't
ROI.
deliver expected ROI. So I
Correct.
think thanks for clarifying that distinction, Vijay. So I think that segues into our next question, that this technology audit that you have been doing for about 25 years. So tell us how things have changed. Where are the darts being misfired after so many years? And I think we talk about absorption of technology. You are passionate about it. So tell us some, experiences or incidences, where you have sort of deep dived and you've found where something has worked or not worked, and also tell us some stories where it did not work, and then then something was done which was like a hypothesis being proven, and then it started working.
Sure. See, one of the interesting things, and I'm just going to go back to that early research that I'd done in the mid '90s with organizations rolling out ERP for the first time. So when I started to then ask, more probing questions, that okay, if 86% is not happening, why is it not happening? And I got a variety of reasons. People who tell me, this is because end user training, didn't happen properly. At that time, whenever an ERP rollout happened, it used to be like months and months of end user training because you were changing something. Other people told me that, this is because you're asking departments who have been trained by legacy to keep hold on to that information, to protect it, to not share it with anyone else. Suddenly you're culturally asking them, no, single version of the truth is required, so sales must share what their order book is looking like, and production must figure out their inventories and share it with everyone. And so there was a cultural wrenching of the organization that didn't go down well. Yet other people told me that it was because of so much spaghetti code being added, because we were customizing, because every organization at that stage felt that they had a very unique process. And this was way before, the Oracles and the SAPs of the world put out the templatized thing where, 90 days and you are up and running and things like that. ERP back then used to take years. And if you were, heaven help you, if you were attempting a multi-module deployment or multi-location deployment, it was absolutely hell. I mean, anyone who's been there would know that. But I actually figured out across all of that, only two things were actually at play there, which would determine whether things would succeed, fall into place or not. One was actually questioning the core business workflow process. And I didn't see too much of that happening. So essentially what what was happening, and it unfortunately continues to happen still, is that you move back then from a manual process to a semi-automated process, or from a semi-automated to an automated process, and maybe in today's day and age with AI and ML, from an automated process to an intelligent process. At each of those points, an organization has the ability, and I think the responsibility, to question whether that core workflow must change, right? Now, legacy, don't get me wrong, I believe legacy is also a good thing, because it tells organizations the most efficient way of doing things, which has evolved over a period of time. So all legacy is not bad. But when you introduce a new technology or a new strategy into the equation, I think organizations should actually question, should we change the way we are doing things? Should we change the organization we are? Should we change a lot of other things? And I think a lot of that questioning does not happen, because those are very tough calls. Because when somebody is looking at it, if whoever has the responsibility of getting this new technology or new strategy into place, they look at the problem, they look at how many people's minds they will have to change in that direction, and they will think that, should I really attempt this? Because this looks like it's not going to be solvable soon, right? So I think that scares off some. There's a level of fear that comes in. The second issue, which was very clear to me, was that the single largest reason that IT projects so-called fail to deliver the results is people. People not accepting whatever had been built for them, right? And this came to me organization after organization. I found this, and there were organizations that did it well. And the other interesting thing through that entire process, Jagdish, was that I realized that this was not an IT problem at all. This was a problem with every single function in an organization which was trying to do something new. Any new initiative, it could be in HR, which maybe was planning a new mechanism of doing performance appraisals, or it could be sales, which was starting a new incentive program, or it could be production on the shop floor where they were rejigging the flow of men, material, and information through the shop floor. Any of those points when something new was attempted, I was starting to see the same things at play. I'll tell you two stories. Let me start with a cautionary tale of what happens when tech cannot work out. So I won't name the organization because you and I both know all of the players who were in play at that time. So let's just spare everyone their blushes. So there's this fairly large, well-known organization that many years back embarked on server virtualization, right? And they were very happy with it. It was doing great stuff for them. They had timed it along with their server refresh, and the CFO was really happy when the footprint shrank because now they were buying fewer machines and all of that. And then one of the first workloads they put onto it was their performance appraisal thing. And this was bang in the middle of their performance appraisal cycle. And they had, I think, a 6-monthly cycle, if I recall right. And so they do it. And then everyone across the organization, every single reporting and reviewing manager is upset because you can finish filling up somebody's performance appraisal, hit save, and then you can literally, as someone told me, you could go have a cup of tea and come back and it may still not save. Latency simply had gone up and stuff like that, right? So they were getting flack from everybody, right? So they figured, let's go back to drawing board after this cycle is over. But at every single meeting, not only HR but every department head screamed, what did you do? Why did you have to do this? Cut to 6 months later when the next cycle clocked in, right? Everything was absolutely smooth, right? And in fact, the HR person wrote them a mail saying, you guys have worked so hard. We're so glad that, whatever we had the challenges then, we no longer have that challenge. And here's the interesting thing. The reason was because this IT team simply took that workload off virtualization and stuck it onto Iron, right? So the good thing is, I think the realization that technology is not always the fix, or newer technology is not always the fix. Whatever works for your organization is fine. It doesn't need to be the shiniest, brightest thing. I'll take 2 more minutes and share one little story with you. It's of an organization that I really consider one of the most innovative organizations in India, and it's this outfit called Titan. Right? It's a Tata Group company. It's one of the few Tata Group companies. There are 3 or 4 of them which are actually headquartered in Bangalore. So I don't know whether this is a function of some distance from Bombay House, but they do interesting stuff. They've always had, for instance, for a very long time, had a very senior person in the management heading innovation, heading their innovation council. And they do things that a lot of other people do. They have one system of doing suggestions. They have one entire week when they spend only going over new ways of doing things, but they have done it over time. And one of the things is they actively encourage people across pay grades to actually come up with new ways and then to describe why. I think for them it's not enough that you put in a suggestion in a suggestion box. You have to actually step up in front of them and tell them why that is different, why it is going to make a difference to people's lives, those who work at Titan. Now here's the other issue. Now in the late 90s or mid to late 90s is when Titan started using gold, first in their watches, then of course in a division which they spun off, India's first branded jewelry brand, Tanishq. And they don't melt industrial quantities of gold, they melt small quantities of gold. So they do this in these crucibles made of silicon carbide. It's also known as carborundum. So if you've ever seen anybody go to any of the towns, on a cycle, this guy will come, he'll sharpen your knives. Those grinding wheels are all made out of the same material and it sustains a high degree of heat. So gold typically melts at about 1400 degrees Celsius. So you use it. And the challenge with carborundum is it's not a smooth material. It's rough. So after some time, after the nth use, gold starts getting trapped in those cracks and those nodules. Titan knew that. And the point was they would stop using it and they would bring in a new crucible to use and so on and so forth. And they actually even approached other organizations to figure out what could be done with this, right? And essentially, it involved setting up a whole new factory just to process these silicon carbide crucibles. And you've been part of manufacturing for a very long time. You know, that's setting up a new plant just to do this, which is not the core product, is never an easy discussion from either the finance side or the plant side. So they took these crucibles, put them in gunny bags, and stored them in a warehouse in their factory, which is on the outskirts of Bangalore. Now, something very interesting happens at one of these points. So, one of these days, when these crucibles are being moved, a crucible falls from a table onto the floor and cracks open, just breaks like that. And a factory worker, this guy is just an ordinary shop floor worker. He is not a foreman, he's not in any of the management grades. There's a guy called Rajshekhar. He notices this, and a thought sparks in his mind. And you know, like in all of our minds, when we get this light bulb moment, right, then you want to do something about it. And in his mind, over the next week or so, just kept bubbling in his head. He knew he had to do something. So he does something very interesting. He takes 200 rupees, his own money. And this is, Rajshekhar is not somebody who lives in some Tony South Bangalore bungalow. He lives in a shack, a juggi, right? He takes 200 rupees, gives it to his neighbor, who is the driver of a vehicle, right? He doesn't own the vehicle, but he drives it. And this guy so-called rents that vehicle from him for a day. He drives that vehicle to the Titan factory. And here is when things start to go. This is not something that happens in any other factory, at least in my experience. They open the gates. This vehicle drives in. Nobody stops. Neither the guards nor anybody else. And he drives this vehicle all the way to the warehouse where those gunny bags are kept. Nobody stops him. He goes into the warehouse, nobody still stops him. He picks up one of those gunny bags, puts it in front of this vehicle, and this vehicle is essentially a road roller, right? And he drives the road roller over it. And the funniest thing with silicon carbide is that while it can sustain a high degree of heat, while it can grind and sharpen tools or, abrade other surfaces, it is also extremely brittle. So he basically, by riding this, has pulverized this gunny bag full of silicon carbide crucibles into powder. Literally, chura has happened. And then something very interesting happens. The others at Titan are watching this. Because then, once you have reduced this to a powder, all you need to do is heat it above the temperature of gold melting, and gold flows out. The first year, about 4.5 kilos of gold are recovered this way. And they don't need to set up a factory. Just in one corner of their existing factory, they now have this furnace which is used for gold recovery. And here's the interesting thing: he's given an award. It's a substantial cash award. He's bumped up 2 levels in pay grade. But I think the most important thing is the fact that somehow within Titan, they have convinced people that it is okay to experiment, and it's okay to fail at that also. Nobody will yell at you. As long you as long as you've had an idea that helps, right? And I credit them with creating a environment that is conducive to that, right? And one of the other things is an environment that is dependent on them telling stories to actually explain why their idea is great, right? Because when you tell a story or when you describe it in detail, then I think this clarifies in your mind as well. You will also yourself be able to figure out maybe this isn't the best idea, or maybe there's another way to approach it, right? Here's the other interesting thing that happens, and I'll finish the story. Titan doesn't let this go as it is. Like all organizations that have IT in them, they produce more printouts than are required, and typically they they would take these printouts and sell it for raddi, for scrap at some point, right? So they said, look, if there's we just recovered this gold, could there be gold in some of these printouts, which is dust when you're doing other activity? So then they shove these papers into the furnace, and I think the first year, if I'm not mistaken, some 2.8 kilos of gold came out of that. It obviously, our friends at Titan haven't been to Zaveri Bazaar in Bombay, because there they literally vacuum every square inch of all the workers there. Even the drains aren't let loose for diamond dust, gold dust, all of that. But the interesting thing is that you get change done by making people part of that change. Okay, and to the story that you asked, what must change, right? I think just as IT, I don't think it's totally corrected this, but I think the IT department doesn't celebrate its wins as much as it should, because there is a lot of benefit that it provides to the rest of the organization. That's one. Second, I think they should also, I bill myself as a storyteller. And one of the things that is the most important organ of the human body for any good storyteller is this, the ear. Before you tell stories, you must also learn to listen. So I think to craft relevant products and services for the rest of the organization, to actually focus on that business value coming back, I think what the IT department needs to do is listen to their challenge and solve it. And there are lots of CIOs who do interesting things. There are some CIOs who mark out a small little portion of their budget to do experiments and prototyping. There are people like you. I remember you telling me about something that you used to do back at Tata Motors called Mangal Gyan, right?
Yeah,
That's a very interesting thing to do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah. So I think we were. Let me tell you about the Mangal Gyan first. So we had just brought in Office 365, and everybody was just so relieved and happy that your whatever 20-25 MB mailbox is now being replaced by a 50 GB mailbox, and there was no adoption beyond that. So and we were like really struggling. We were watching these numbers come out, like how much of each of those tools are being used, but we didn't know that there's some people who are using it. So one of the brainstorming, we came out with this idea that why don't we tell stories through cartoons? Okay. So we planned the whole thing. The Mangalyaan had just succeeded last year. So somebody suggested, was why don't we call it Mangalyaan? I said, good idea. I mean, fantastic. Okay, and it would go on Tuesdays. Okay, Tuesday morning, everybody will get a mail saying Mangal Gyan, your bite of learning enable. Enable was the name of the Office 365 program. And then as soon as you open it, there will be a cartoon strip, sort of 6-block cartoon strip. And then there'll be a 1-paragraph story. And then there will be a link to the training. Okay. And then there will be a call to action, which is if you have some story, if you have used any of the tools and found success, please write to us. We will feature you in Mangal Gyan. And we signed up a cartoonist for 52 such emails. We said we'll run it for a year. Okay, it's celebrating. You can celebrate as much as you want, right? So the whole thing became a very big hit, and the feedback we got was that people used to wait for that because it had real names. People could relate to them, real names, real departments, real locations, and celebrating them. Now coming back to some of the points that that
I'm not able to hear you, Jagdish.
can you hear me, Vijay?
Now I can.
Okay. So, so I have this analogy for this, okay? So you have this 2-lane road, okay? And there's a barricading like this, what the Tamil Nadu police does on the Karnataka border. Okay. And now you decide to build a 6-lane highway there. Okay. But you don't remove the barricade. Okay. So you have now a 6-lane highway with this barricade there. You will have longer jams. So
Yeah.
not looking at your process, okay, and implementing a new technology, debottlenecking stuff is going to actually get you more bottlenecks. The other one, on this people thing, my first ever program in CRM, where I had just moved from business, it was the same thing. You know, we we didn't look at it as a headquarter program. So we mapped everybody right from bottom up. Okay, so dealer sales executive, service advisor, sales manager, service manager, workshop manager, dealer proprietor, dealer account manager of Tata Motors, zonal manager of Tata Motors, regional manager of Tata Motors. We actually mapped out each one of them as to what would they want out of the system. Okay, so actually, some wise man had once told us that, listen, you will succeed in life when what you're doing, you must ask only one question. Maro su. This is a Guju question. What is in it for me? If
Correct.
you're able
Correct.
to convince the person sitting in front of you, what is in it for him, you will succeed in getting your work done from him. And this is exactly, we just followed that advice to the T, and we mapped each one of them. So, and not that we could do everything right then and there. So we implemented those transactions, which made those happy. For the supervisors, we couldn't give them analytics from day one. So what we did was we actually trained them on how to take a dump of data from the CRM. And you won't believe, we trained them how to do pivot tables.
Oh,
So we train supervisors on pivot tables, the operators on CRM. So just your story is really resonated. So now we have lots of business leaders as well as CIOs on this on the ClarITea Chat. So how should CIOs look at their role, and very importantly, how should CXOs and CEOs should look at the CIO role, and how should they empower the CIOs to raise this bar?
so a few years back when I started this practice of storytelling for business change, 6 years ago. Around that time, a lot of organizations were calling me to come and talk about digital transformation. Is it really real? What might be, three things that can help us, and what might get in the way? When I was talking to a lot of leadership teams at that time, one question would come up remarkably often back then, which is, should we have a CDO? Should we put and my humble suggestion to them was, look, it doesn't make a difference whether it's the CIO running things or the CDO running this digital initiative or even a CMO, depending on the organization. The bigger issue was, do they have a mandate to get change done, right? Because on a lot of organizations, even marquee organizations, which have, very smart people at the helm, I find that when this mandate to get change done doesn't exist, then nothing really happens. The needle really doesn't move. Yeah. And in fact, my, again, very humble suggestion back to them was, if you aren't going to empower the person leading digital or digital transformation in the organization in that way, then you better let the CEO run that, because the CEO, by the nature of their job, has that mandate to change. I mean, that's what they do. That's what they're supposed to do, to build a roadmap for the future. And that is essentially what being a digital organization or a digital business is about. Is it, how do you reinvent yourself constantly such that you won't get disrupted, right? Uh, it seems like something that's tough to do, but here's one very interesting fact. Many years back, almost 20 years back, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, are there a lot of organizations that have existed for a certain length of time? Because I'd come across this business that the Fortune 500 has existed maybe for the last 55, 56 years, and only 12% of organizations today are the ones that were there back then. The rest have either become redundant, irrelevant, or have been acquired, or have become so small that they no longer fit into the 500, top 500, right? So I was trying to figure this out, and what I found was there are at least 1,000 organizations, big and small, around the world, which are more than 400 years old. Okay, and when I look at these organizations, then I start to. It's in these organizations which have stood the test of time that you start to learn about very interesting things. Some of these are very focused organizations, right? So you find them primarily in Europe or in Japan, right? Uh, in Europe, they tend to be in hospitality. In Japan too, but Japan has had fair success with some of these organizations. Uh, they tend to be in two polar opposites. Either you have them focused on, the Jack Welch way of core competency. I'll give you one example. Beretta is over 400 years old. It's an Italian manufacturer of handguns. They used to make hand muskets then. They make handguns today. They are extremely good at what they do. For the last maybe many years, the US Army standard sidearm has been a Beretta, replacing the old Colt that used to be there. They are that good, right? It's been held in the same family generation after generation. They have not budged from. So they don't make anti-aircraft guns. They don't make cannons. They make personal weapons, right? They've stayed with that. And there are others which have, like Sumitomo, which have massively diversified. Sumitomo was born just a few years after Beretta in 1615. It's a great example. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is that these organizations have stood the test of time because A, there is self-belief that what they are on the right path. B, more self-belief. When they have needed to, they have experimented, right? When I mentioned this business of, keeping aside some part of your budgets, and I know IT budgets are under stress. In fact, all budgets are under stress all the time. It's because it gives you the leeway to do things like this, to do some level of prototyping on your own, right? Uh, and I can't think of no better example of all of this than our friend Mr. Dandapani, who was at TVS Motors, right? I don't know whether he's hearing this, but he did something very interesting in TVS called shelf engineering. Okay, now you've been part of an auto major, uh, and there also, I mean, if you have an engines team, it's not like they're only building an engine for, say, a 1300cc engine for a car. The engines team keeps building engines, So similarly at TVS, the engines team is keeping on building, and then at some point they say, okay, the TVS Jupiter requires a 125cc engine, for instance, and there it comes. And the reason why it was called shelf engineering is because these engines used to be kept on the standard blue-gray slotted iron angle shelves that every manufacturing outfit somewhere or the other has. So they would keep making these engines and keeping it there. And he noticed it one day. And so he called his team and he said that if these guys can continually make engines and keep it ready until it is required, so that the moment it's required, bam, they say, okay, you want a 125cc engine here, you want a 100cc engine here, you want a 50cc engine here, right? So he said, why can't we do that in the IT team? So he carved out a little part of his budget without, of course, I suspect, informing management that he was doing that. But in his mind, X percentage of the budget, and if I recall right, it was about 6%. He would keep it, and they started prototyping stuff that they thought business required. Okay, and then they brought in, all the SBU heads to, and if you ever visit the TVS campus at Hosur, the TVS Motors campus, then everything is an industrial shed, including the IT department. So in that, they gave up one of their conference rooms and put up, so to speak, these prototypes, right? So they would, take the business guys saying, hey, we built this. Do you think this is good? Initially, they didn't get it right? Because they had done it kind of in isolation without telling anyone. They built a prototype. but the feedback that they got from those SBU heads uh, allowed them to tweak, fine tune, and all of that. And then as time went by, they got better at figuring out what business wanted and putting that together. So every quarter, they would have this process by which they would do that. And one of these things that came out of that was a touchscreen kiosk, which the IT team had built uh, and then shown to the people who were the gentleman who was in charge of dealer engagement. Because one of the challenges that the IT team had figured, spending time not only with the dealer engagement team, but actually visiting dealers to see what was going on, was that however good the training was, no dealer employee or salesperson would know all the features of all the vehicles they were producing. So they created this touchscreen kiosk which would call out features, functionality, everything, right? The dealers loved it, by the way, because it saved them the trouble of exploring. The salesperson could simply point them and they could use it as a show and tell device or allow prospective customers to do that, right? Uh, and so shelf engineering, which is what Mr. Dandapani called it, I think is great. It has everything going for it. It has the IT team reaching out to business to figure out what is most relevant to them. It is prototyping to a level where finally, when the business says, yes, we are good, it cuts down the time to go live, right? I think those are skills that a lot of CIOs have already. Uh, will this completely fit into your thing? No. But I think some of it, in every organization, some of it can be done. I think most CIOs are fairly smart about navigating the political landscape that exists within their organization. Being able to do that, being able to convince business that you are doing things that are relevant for them, I think that's a great skill to develop. Celebrating either through things like Mangal Gyan or actually putting together an annual report of what the business investment in IT was and what the value returned was, I think is a great thing of celebrating not only your own team, but telling the rest of the organization, boss, this is what we guys did for you, right?
Yeah.
I think all of those things uh, are great to have. Uh, and I think those should be part and parcel of every CIO's toolkit
Yeah.
to succeed, to get change done. Because I'll just end with one last thing. As far as I'm concerned, Jagdish and I were having a conversation the other day, and he asked a very relevant question. What is the job of the IT team? What the job of the sales team is and what the job of the finance team is. What's the job of the IT team? And very clearly, he himself came to the conclusion that the job of the IT team was not technology. He thought, and he very clearly felt that it is process. It is about owning process within the organization. It's about revamping it. It's about reinventing it and taking it forward. I'll add one further tweak to it. I think it's not just process, although it's a very large part of it. I think the mandate of the IT team is actually to get organizational change done. All the CIOs and all the teams that own that and think in those terms, then the magic happens. Otherwise, it's business as usual.
No, absolutely. And I think, Vijay, I really connect with, when you said that we should tell stories. Like, for example, everybody does POCs, but, to kind of connect that philosophy of doing POCs with something that the organization is already doing and saying that I'm doing shelf engineering in IT, simply makes that connection. So, this is something where I can share one incident. Way back, I think just about a year after I had joined, I actually came from sales and marketing. So, sales and marketing is all about like, storytelling and, and selling. And I figured out that, oh my God, there's so much of good work that the team is doing, but, we are kind of ensconced in a corner and all that. So I started doing this, team building thing, an annual IT function called Outdo. So I remember the first Outdo was Outdo 2010. We got an external agency. I fought for some budget from my boss, and I said the IT team hasn't met across all the 7 plants. People don't know each other. They haven't met each other, and we curated a 2.5 day program in Khandala. Uh, And that was like the and then as we were planning it, and then it happened every year since I was there, is that what do we now do in that 2.5 days? Okay, so we started calling business leaders. So okay, let's collect all our success stories. I said, no, what if we tell success stories? So we actually went back to the business leaders and we said, boss, can you tell us what has been our contribution? Here's the video camera. Okay, so now he's telling for 5 minutes, what all IT has done for them, how it has impacted their business. This is the first time we are asking him that question. And we collected all these videos across the organization. And then, in that conference with business people around and our entire IT team of about 120 people, including some partner leaders also, play back those videos, it would give you goosebumps. Okay. And I think that's the charm that we have in terms of, how little we tell our stories, how less we celebrate, and all like, very well connect with what you just mentioned. So Vijay, I think we are at the end of our, time. We have taken all of this time in storytelling, but let me still take some questions.
Sure.
And I'm just like, I hope you have time, but for others,
I have time.
okay, so that's great. For others, you can watch the recordings later, just in case you're running out of time. So let me take a question, and it's a selfish one because I want him on my show sometime. So that is Arun Gupta. A very respected senior. So his question is, the risk reward paradigm has been a hurdle for IT. Is that changing now, and what is your guidance to IT leaders?
So I don't know whether he's asking you or me, Jagdish. How would you see it? I mean, I have some thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts around this.
Please. You have seen more IT landscape than me.
See, the challenge is that ever since the first joint stock company was set up, and this was set up in Holland to deal with tulips, because there was a lot of, just like the speculation around Bitcoin these days, there was the great tulip bubble that happened a few centuries ago, where people would speculate on the price of tulips, right? And at some point, like all bubbles go, it blew, and the market crashed. But even before that, I think the fundamental bit about business is that without any risk, there is no reward. And one of the things that I have seen, and to the point that you were asking earlier, the earlier question, I think Amrinder's question on skill sets, right? What skill sets do you want? If there is one thing that I'd like to see change a lot more, it is in technology's attitude towards risk, right? The big difference that I see between business executives and IT executives is that most business executives and most CEOs particularly see risk and see the upside. Sure, there are downsides, but what could be the upside? What can this get us? But I think a lot more people, CIOs, see risk and see it as something to protect the organization from. It's a difference in perspective, right? Both are very valid, but I don't think you can actually get moving without taking some of those chances. And I think, of course, in more mature organizations or even less mature organizations, I think when anyone embarks on something new, you do try to balance out what might be a downside, right? And figure it out. I think none of us does none of the CIOs that I know has ever done a go live without planning it, without managing the project well, and things like that. Having said that, I think the other element of risk is not to wait on the rest of the C-suite to figure out what should be done. I think IT owes it to itself to push it forward. See, I'm not one of these people who believes that the function is going to be non-existent. I've heard this every 5 years someone comes up with this thing that IT does not matter, or the CIO function is gone, or marketing is going to be spending more on tech than tech itself, or CDOs are going to run rampant. I've seen all of that come and go, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners today have, and viewers have also seen that. Should it actually be doing something different? Absolutely. Because I think this is the one function in an organization that, to your point, Jagdish, can actually get that process change done. Uh, Finance, nothing much changes. Neither does sales. Sales, you come from that background. Sales is sales is sales. The functionality might change, the product mix might change, the revenue pipeline you're generating might change, but the function remains where it is.
Yeah.
IT is one of the only functions within an organization, save marketing, where you can actually attempt something new. Uh, you can attempt something new, and to use a phrase, you can actually get away with some of that, right?
And
Uh,
and 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 very importantly, Vijay, I'm actually playing back your words. You also said that this is one function which touches the organization horizontally. So you could done
Correct,
something new in sales, you can do something new in research and development, you can do something new in manufacturing.
correct, correct.
So
Outside of
so
finance, let's be very
yeah.
sure, the other function that touches the entire organization, if not for just paying everyone's salaries and making sure of inputs and outputs, finance is also fairly horizontal. But I don't think they have the same level of capacity to get change done that technology really has.
So Vijay, I think your bell has been rung 3 times, so you can pick it up while I answer the question for from
All
my
right.
perspective. Okay.
Okay, just a
So
minute.
yeah. So Arun sir, I think the risk reward equation, we have to really break down that equation into 2 3 parts. So generally we look at IT role as run, grow, transform. Predominantly 80% of what we do is run, okay, which is like keep the lights on, and I think that's where this dominant mindset comes to us, which is risk aversion. Okay. Now, when you look at the grow and transform, we don't need to be that risk averse in my view. Okay, I can share one story from my time. We had a program which was like really struggling, failing. I kind of resurrected it. We rebaselined the project plan, and we were supposed to go live around October. This was a manufacturing execution system for the car plant. Okay, and then around July or August, a lot of stuff was done, and there was this risk mitigation thing, which is that the old system is running, the new system is running. You build a bridge that the data gets synchronized between the two. And around July August time, they wanted an extension, to go into November December, and November December, because of the discounts, this heavy pressure which is there. Or I think it was about we have to go live in September, and then we were going to push it back to October, and that's the Diwali time, so lots of pressure on manufacturing. And I said, what happens if, so far, with all the shops that have gone live, we haven't faced a single issue build the bridge. What if we try to go live? And uh, everybody kind of developed cold feet. So I said, let's go to the plant heads and see whether, you know, whether what do they think about it? Let's just pick their thoughts. And we went there and we told them the two scenarios that, we build this entire risk mitigation and then, touch and go live in October, which is the Diwali time, versus we take a bit of risk in a couple of shops, which we can't build the bridge in time. And, but we go live now, which is August, which is monsoon. Okay. Not much of production activity. We can always do bug fixing. And, there is an event, and the plant head was like, all welcome and gaga that, Jagdish, great that you guys thought about it. We'll support you. You guys will go live on weekends. We'll put our people out there on the weekends, for whatever you need and all of that. And just like that, by taking that risk and signing and sort of collaborating on that risk with our plant guys, we were actually able to pull back the entire project timeline by 2 months. So a delay of 1 month actually became a pullback by 2 months. So it's I think we got to innovate a little bit on that as well. Not be afraid of taking risk, I would say. So let's go to another question, Vijay. So Amrinder has been asking questions right from the beginning. So he says, how would the skill sets and personality traits of CIOs, equivalents, and IT leaders on the OEM service providers would change or be in the year to 2030, 2035?
I don't think skill sets, we've already gone over the skill sets that I think I wouldn't expect people to change it, but I would expect them to push some of those things ahead. I think one of the challenges which is not going to go away is, even with the way that teams are shrinking, the IT team across all organizations has been shrinking for a long while. So while people management might not seem important, I think it's even more important now, because the dependency on, I see a lot of CIOs who just, will do anything to retain their direct reports, because those are very critical people. They've been in the system long enough. They have the potential for leadership. They have built relationships across other teams. So I think that doesn't go away. Some of those things don't go away, but I'd like to start seeing CIOs, as I said, push the agenda themselves, rather than wait for anybody else to set an agenda for them. Because I've seen that shift incredibly since, as I said, 2008, 2009. I think that slowdown at that point changed everything. So some things I think will not change. My suspicion is that a lot more, if I can hazard a guess about what will it, dependency on service providers, I think will be much higher many years down the line. It might still not be full. India is a very interesting country. We are literally outsourcers. The world outsources to us. But Indian organizations don't really believe in total outsourcing. The numbers are still around 8 or 9% of mid-sized and large organizations which do total outsourcing. The rest of them will outsource to 5, 6 different people. I think the challenge with that is also, without getting into the depths of it, I think service providers will also require to improve their capabilities. My numbers are fairly dismal that it's sub 40% of service provider contracts are renewed with the same service provider. And I think that's dismal. It is dismal. Our entire outsourcing industry would have gone kaput. Our entire software services and business processing industry would have gone kaput if they didn't get repeat business. And I think that is very strange. So I would expect service providers to improve their game. I also suspect that dependency on service providers will only trend higher. I don't see, and I'm very open about this, I do not see in the near future, at least. I don't know 15 years from now, but I don't see in the near future people simply dumping their data centers and moving everything onto the public cloud. I think it will continue. I hate at some level the phrase hybrid cloud, because it's not a true hybrid. There are some buckets there and there are some buckets here, and there isn't a pipeline connecting the two. Some organizations do have it, but for the most part, it's horses for courses or workloads for data centers, whether they're inside your perimeter or out. But I think it's fascinating. I think the best thing about tech is that there is almost every 4 years you get a generational shift in technology. Now you can catch it at that point, or you can wait for the next. Both are perfectly, okay strategies to adopt. I remember once asking Mr. Narayanamurthy at the time when he was still very directly involved with with Infosys what his opinion on cutting edge technology was. And he said, look, there are leaders and there are followers, and we would love to only be leaders. So our embrace of technology has to be high because we also provide that. If we don't use it ourselves, then how do we even go and convince clients that we want to be, we can do it for them? So he says that we would always want to be ahead of the curve. I'll give you another example from an organization that isn't with technology as its core. Indian Oil, right? Indian Oil was one of these places, one of these organizations that every ERP patch, every new feature they would implement instantly, and that's not an easy thing to do, especially not in an organization of that size. Because there's always the fear that what if something goes wrong and your entire operations grind to a halt. But they would do it, and I was very curious why. And that's because A, they have a gigantic IT team in comparison to their size and their budgets. B, they provide a lot of those technologies, right? They consult in the petroleum sector on ERP, they provide consultancy. So again, for them to be on the cutting edge of innovation meant you need to be current, right? And so, like I said, it depends on the organization. And let me just add one thing. One of my former colleagues, a guy called Balaji, is heavily into astrology, right? He really is hardcore, casts his own horoscopes and things like that. And so one day when he was doing this, I was just looking over his shoulder to see what was going on, and he was trying to explain, and I don't have the mind to absorb any of that. So I couldn't figure out what were the houses and what he was doing. But then I started to realize, uh, getting real change done through IT, there are three things that must get into alignment beyond business IT alignment and things like that. One is the CEO or the CMD and what they want out of the IT department. Very critical. Two, the IT department, the CIO and the team, and what they want out of life. Okay. Do they want to be agents of change or not? It's a decision. It's a choice, right? And three, the organizational mindset or culture. If any of these things is a little out of whack, a little out of alignment, you are going to get to some of those numbers that we were talking about earlier, where you would deploy a project, it will functionally work, but it wouldn't give the business benefit that one wanted. But when these things are in alignment, in a lot of organizations that I've seen where magic has truly happened, uh, then these three get into alignment. What the business head wants, what the IT head wants, and what the organization wants. When these three combine, brilliant stuff happens. And those are some of the success stories that get highlighted in tech media. The question you asked right at the beginning, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
But
So, so Vijay, yeah, in the interest of time, like I just want to take some quick questions. There's one from Imran, and I can answer that. It says during that period, a number of business heads started parallel IT initiatives. I think this post 2008-9, which also created a distance between IT and business. I have seen invariably that in my tenure also, whenever people started something, you know the project part, which is the easy and sexy part, that is what they could do. Then they realize that, oh my god, once you it's like the act which is like which is pleasurable, but then you develop cold feet when you have to bring up the child. Okay. So it invariably happened the moment they found that, oh my god, this is like something I have to nurture. They invariably came back to us and said, boss, अभी हमने बच्चा पैदा कर दिया, can you now take care of him? So it eventually comes back, and there are other stuff like, for example, security and all of that. So it eventually comes back. So let me see if there are any other questions.
There's actually a very nice question that's come in right at the bottom just now from Dattatreya Patnaik.
Yeah. Please, your perspective.
So I'll give you a question that I'll give you an answer that doesn't answer this directly. In fact, I don't think this will happen, first of all. Second, I think there is a challenge out here, right? And I think that the biggest challenge that I see when it comes to security is twofold. One is, at the outset, Jagdish said that complexity, IT is a complex beast, and that's one of the reasons why you don't get to that ROI, and you have other challenges as well. But I'll tell you what is the other thing that complexity does. Complexity makes security more difficult, right? The typical attitude towards security is to wrap the information assets and the human assets of the company in layer upon layer of technology from across OEMs and service providers. So you have 50 different pieces of technology, hardware and software related, from 10 different OEMs or service providers. And here's what I have found, because security is something I study very deeply, that every successive layer of technology, if you don't also invest in managing that piece well, and if you don't invest in the human resources required to do that management, then every successive layer of technology actually increases the vulnerability rather than reduce it. Because the deluge of data that you get out of that is so high, it is physically impossible for humans to handle. That's it. Second, I'll tell you what my other challenge with security is. In the last 15 years, just take 15 years, something very interesting has happened within Indian organizations. The number of CSOs has actually gone down. It's very difficult to name even one person who has that designation within an organization. But the number of CISOs at the same time has gone up. Now, in organizations where it is still an independent function, regardless of the designation, where they report in either to the CEO, the CMD, or the board, things are still on even keel, right? Because they have oversight. But in large percentage of mid-sized and large Indian organization, that function now reports into the CIO, and it's been doing so for a long time, right? I have two challenges with that. Then the security function or the CISO's function doesn't become about risk, which is what it ought to be. Because what the CISO or the CSO does is figure out what is the optimal level of risk that an organization can consume. What's the appetite, right? Whereas what happens is when you make it about technology, then it's a tactical role. It becomes about adding that extra layer of technology. It's about building wall after wall after wall, and occasionally putting a door or a window in it, right? So I think that is a challenge. And I also will state something that a lot of people tell me, which I don't believe in, that security is a boardroom topic. In the best and the brightest of organizations, yes. Does it get raised in the board? Absolutely. Is it on their radar? Yes. Is it a priority? I don't think so. Not until something goes wrong. And I don't want to go down the path where, we're talking about which organizations. There are lots of organizations. Just because it doesn't come out, just because under the Indian IT laws, we are not mandated to tell consumers when there's a breach and their data has got ripped, doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It happens all the time. It's just that I don't see CISOs emerge. I think the CIO position will stay. Uh, in fact, over the last maybe 5 years, the number of Indian organizations telling me that they are going to have a CDO position either now or maybe in the near future. 5 years back, that number was 13.5%. Today, that number is 6%. So in most organizations, unless they are in something like banking or financial services or FMCG, that position no longer exists. It's either been subsumed under somebody who's handling digital and is called something else, or it has simply rolled back into tech. Uh, I am of the firm opinion that the CIO position is not extinct, not endangered, and will remain. There will always be need for a person who can take both a strategic as well as a tactical view towards enterprise technology. It's also always going to be a work in progress. Unless you're an absolute startup or a greenfield organization, tech will always be a work in progress. It's like a multi-tiered cake, right? You did ERP at this point, CRM at that point. You got mobility in here, you got analytics still here, you got maybe AI and ML and automation at some level. And I think the bigger challenge will be to clear out those parts of legacy that you don't want, but
Yeah.
keep those parts of legacy that you want. Uh, Legacy is also about the ethos of the organization. Legacy is about your corporate principles. Those are key. I think every organization, typically those which have been founded by someone, or even if it's a professionally run outfit right from the beginning, you need to go back to your origin story and figure out why your organization is even set up in the first place. And I believe
Yeah.
a lot of these questions around change get settled then. If you figure
Yeah.
out what was your prime focus in life 10, 20, 30, 40, 80, 400 years back, then you know exactly where you're going, what you're doing right, and what you must fix.
Yeah. So actually, this is the question related to that from Vijay. Which technologies do you see coming up? Which technologies do you think will remain unchanged? So it is like the yin and yang equation. So many times, again, we look at technology as a single equation, but it works in different layers. I really like that whole idea of core layer, and then there's a differentiation layer, there's a innovation layer. So I think in my view, whatever is core, and then also you have to bring in the perspective of technology being the Hotel California, which I say you can get in, you can't
Get
get
in,
out.
leave. Yeah.
You have an ERP, you want to change it, welcome to Hotel California. So the core of it, you can keep upgrading. You probably won't be able to change. I think the real, I would say, magic that's going to happen is like primarily in the innovation layer. And if you don't have the entire stack in the differentiation layer. So as long as you're able to run the core or the base layer, well, I think the focus should be on the differentiation and innovation layers. That is where you just have to keep experimenting. So,
Correct.
yeah, I think that sort of brings us almost to the end of the session. This went far longer so far. I think this is what we have made. But I would say, a lot of appreciation. I'm just going to pull up some of it here. Sadhna says that, transported back into time. So you've been a big storyteller for a very long time. Uh, yeah, even Ganesh Rao says so. I before I close the show with some learnings, I wanted to cover this one. I think this is something um, there's the hero in every one of us, which IT has a big potential. We were talking about IT's potential to create a change.
Yeah.
There's a big potential that so this used to be my strategy that I would go to a business leader and I would say, boss, what I mean, you have you have it in you to become a digital leader. I'll make you one. Okay. Okay, let's do this. And we would kind of chart out a plan, and we would put him right in front of it. We'll do everything, but he'll be the mascot. And that's how actually a lot of change happened. And because so the missing pieces that you talked about, which is people and processes, I think the person who can do that best is that business leader out there. Okay, you make him the hero, and you also extract that entire change management stuff from him. And I think that's how you create magic. So on that note, Vijay, great talking to you. I know our discussions have lasted longer, but just a quick wrap up. Thank you for sharing the research findings with us, and
Always.
really, telling us that it's not so much about technology, but your absorption of change is about processes and people. Okay, those are the wraparounds you require. Organization culture plays a big role. Again, another one about CIOs not doing enough in terms of celebrating, in terms of storytelling, in terms of being that catalyst of change, or So one is like, being the taking the mandate for change, or sometimes seeking the mandate for change. Thanks so much, Vijay, for being here. We
Enjoyed
enjoyed
being
our cup of
here,
tea.
Jagdish.
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't catch
and
that.
I said I enjoyed my cup of tea more with this discussion. Thank you everyone so much for being here and for participating and asking questions. See you next week, Tuesday, 5 p.m. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you particularly for your patience because we've well short over the time. But I really enjoyed speaking to you, Jagdish, as always. Thanks a ton.
Hey, thank you, Vijay. And thank you, everyone. See you. Bye bye. See you next week.